It did not begin with a bomb or a battlefield. It began with a paper. On the first day of August, 2025, Washington signed a decree of 50% tariff on the lifeblood of Burkina Faso, its shea butter. For over 20 years, that golden paste had nourished women across dusty villages and bustling towns, turning their labor into creams and balms sold on glamorous shelves from Paris to New York. But in one stroke of a pen, America called it unworthy. No warning, no negotiation, no courtesy. Just a command, bend or break. Yet President Ibrahim Traoré did neither. A soldier turned statesman. He looked into the storm and named it for what it was: economic warfare dressed as policy. The world expected silence, perhaps surrender. Instead, a defiant voice rose from Ouagadougou and swept across the Sahel crossroads. Could one embargo against a small, landlocked nation ignite a continental revolution? Could butter, long dismissed as a peasant's product, become the flag of African sovereignty? Stay with us, because this isn't just another story. It's the future our ancestors dreamed of. Subscribe and walk with us for an Africa that never bows again. The decree fell like thunder across the plains of Burkina Faso. In villages where the red earth clung to the hands of women, silence replaced song. For more than 2 decades, their shea butter had crossed oceans, filling jars in Paris, boutiques, and lining the shelves of American department stores. It was not just butter. It was survival, dignity, and the promise of a tomorrow bought one cracked nut at a time. Now, with one foreign stroke, all of it was branded unworthy. In Bulsa, a mother named Amanatada sat cross-legged, her fingers thick with churned paste. She looked at her children and asked herself a question no mother should ever ask: will we eat tomorrow? Around her, drums of unrefined butter stood idle. Trucks slept under the punishing sun. Drivers unpaid. Engines silent. Procurement offices went dark. Warehouses locked their gates. Phone calls to Missouri, Florida, and Texas rang without answer. In Bobo-Dioulasso, the transport hub of the nation, drivers slept in their cabs, waiting for a journey that would never come. Within just 48 hours, haulage volumes collapsed by 32%. Entière coopérative, once alive with the laughter of women grinding and stirring, stood beneath neem trees, waiting for instructions that never arrived. It was not simply an economic wound, it was a spiritual one. The betrayal cut deeper because it carried no explanation, no press conference, no appeal to fairness, only the vague language of national interest from Washington's marble halls. But in the dusty courtyards of Burkina Faso, it meant hunger. It meant the devaluation not only of a product, but of people, women whose cracked hands had fed both their families and the vanity of foreign markets, now felt discarded like husks. Salamatakunati. A cooperative leader in Kaya gathered her women under the open sky. Her voice did not tremble. They think we are just exporters, she said, but we are mothers. We are fighters. In those words was the defiance of generations who had survived drought, war, and silence. Yet even her resolve could not hide the uncertainty etched into every face around her. In Chicago, far from the Sahel crossroads, Clarissa Woodson stared at the empty shelves of her small natural skincare shop. For 3 months, she whispered, no Shea again. In Miami, a young founder taped shipping boxes by hand, trying to save a business crumbling under the absence of the one ingredient her customers trusted most. Across Brooklyn and Los Angeles, shopkeepers counted losses and laid off staff. But for the women of Burkina Faso, the pain was far sharper. It was not margins or market share. It was the ability to put food on a table, to send a child to school, and to buy medicine when the fever came in the night. When Washington imposed its tariff, it was not numbers on a page, it was an assault on lives. It was the echo of a familiar injustice that Africa's labor could be used, celebrated, then discarded without consequence. This was not the first time the continent had been told its hands were cheap, its worth negotiable. From cotton fields to gold mines, the story had repeated itself across centuries. But here, in the red earth of Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traoré's homeland, the wound was fresh. Raf, undeniable. America had expected compliance. Instead, the wound began to stir something else: anger, dignity, and the memory of a people who had bent too many times before. The women who once cracked nuts barefoot now found themselves staring at closed gates and idle machinery. Yet beneath that silence was a question pressing against history itself. Would this be just another wound? Or the moment Africa finally refused to bleed quietly? In the face of silence from Washington, one voice cut through the storm. It was not the voice of a diplomat in polished shoes, nor the echo of a banker in a marble hall. It was the steady, uncompromising voice of President Ibrahim Traoré, a soldier who had walked through fire long before he ever sat in a presidential chair. On August 2nd, under the hot Ouagadougou sun, he stood before his trade council, before his people, and declared what others were too afraid to name. This is not policy, he said. This is economic warfare. His words did not come with hesitation or apology. They rang like iron striking iron, a rhythm that carried across villages, markets, and ministries. For decades, Africa had been told to accept, to adapt, to wait, but Traore, like Thomas Sankara before him, refused to wait. He called the tariff what it was: a weapon aimed not at butter, but at women, at families, at the very soul of Burkina Faso. And in that moment, the people saw not just a president, but a captain still at war, not with rifles and bullets, but with contracts and cargo routes. Inside the national palace, he did not celebrate anger. He transformed it. Within hours, he summoned regional agricultural unions, announced emergency support for cooperatives, and ordered road repairs to protect the eastern trade corridors. They will not break us by starving our people, it declared. That phrase traveled faster than Shea shipments ever had. It leapt from radio waves in Ouagadougou to headlines in Nairobi and Mumbai. By nightfall, it was on the lips of women grinding kernels beneath neem trees and analysts in glass towers debating the meaning of sovereignty. Traoré's resolve awakened something long buried. In Nairobi, commentators said he sounded like Sankara reborn. In Dakar, students painted murals of his words across university walls. On African news channels, the phrase African sovereignty returned to prime time, no longer as a dream but as a demand. Even in distant capitals, the echo reached. In Dubai and Dhaka, traders shifted their eyes eastward. In Lagos, exporters hesitated to sign new contracts, fearful of becoming pawns in a larger game. For the first time in decades, a West African voice was not pleading but declaring. In the dusty markets of Kaya, Salamata Konate gathered her cooperative again. This time, when she spoke, her tone carried more than endurance. It carried the president's defiance. They tax our labor, she told her sisters, but we will not beg. We will not fold. The women nodded, their cracked hands clenching with quiet power. Burkina Faso Ibrahim Traoré had turned a wound into a rallying cry. Where America expected surrender, he gave strategy. Where the world expected pity, it gave defiance. And in that defiance lay the seed of something larger, the possibility that a continent too often silenced could speak and be heard. Not in whispers, but in thunder. This was more than a speech. It was a signal. It told every cooperative, every farmer, every woman bent over a grinding stone that they were not alone, that their labor was not invisible, It told the world that Burkina Faso would not be measured by how quietly it accepted blows, but by how fiercely it answered them. And so, in the heat of August, when a superpower expected compliance, President Ibrahim Traoré lit a different fire, one that burned not with fear, but with the conviction that Africa could rise without asking permission. When America thought it had cornered a nation, Ibrahim Traoré unveiled his countermove. It came not with begging, not with loans wrapped in chains, but with the stroke of a new agreement that turned despair into strategy. On the 4th of August, in the heart of Ouagadougou, a contract worth $2.1 billion was signed with China's Ministry of Commerce. This was not aid. It was not dependency. It was trade clean, direct, unapologetic. 128 Chinese companies received import licenses, 5-year terms, no quotas, no hidden conditions, direct rail access, priority refining rights. The deal came with infrastructure, solar dryers, technology transfers, and reinvestment clauses written into every line. For once, Africa was not exporting raw wealth for pennies to buy back in luxury packaging. For once, Burkina Faso demanded dignity with every shipment. Inside the national palace, Traore traced his finger across a map. The old route westward, Ouagadougou to American ports, was abandoned. His hand shifted east, stopping at the harbors of Guangzhou. This is our new axis, it declared. The room fell silent, then erupted in applause. In that moment, the wound became a pivot. The pivot became a doctrine, and the doctrine became hope. Women who had sat idle days before now danced outside their cooperatives. It means we work tomorrow, Ayo said, adjusting her headscarf, and next week, and maybe next year. For them, it was more than survival. It was validation. Their butter, once dismissed as filler, had become the crown jewel of a new alliance. Chinese investors moved quickly. Within weeks, processing facilities broke ground in Shenzhen, Tianjin, and Nanjing. What had been a marginal product for Beijing now became central, and for Burkina Faso, the deal meant jobs, sovereignty, and a voice in markets that once ignored it. No longer would Shea be shipped raw, stripped of value, and sold back at a profit to the very hands that made it. The new contracts required local processing, local packaging, local dignity. The shockwaves traveled far. In Nairobi and Accra, radio hosts debated whether cocoa could follow the Shea model. In Dar es Salaam, fashion shows unveiled makeup lines stamped for sovereignty. In Johannesburg, murals proclaimed from soil to sovereignty. Across the continent, the phrase Shea diplomacy gained life. What began as a desperate defense became a continental blueprint. For America, the blow was felt differently. Cosmetic labs in Illinois and Georgia scrambled for substitutes, reformulating creams with Ghanaian stock or synthetic fillers. But consumers noticed. Reviews poured in. This isn't real Shea. Loyalty crumbled. Identity was lost. From Brooklyn to Los Angeles, small black-owned shops mourned the absence of Burkina Faso's butter, yet in Ouagadougou, there was no triumphalism. President Ibrahim Traoré remained sober. He chaired midnight sessions on logistics, refining, and training. He knew this was not the end of a fight, but the beginning of a long war for economic dignity. He insisted every cooperativa receive training in scheduling, invoicing, and negotiation. Women once barefoot in fields now scanned shipping manifests and spoke Mandarin. It was more than trade. It was transformation. Burkina Faso Ibrahim Traoré had turned butter into a banner, contracts into culture, and a tariff into testimony. Where the world saw a fragile, landlocked nation, he carved a sovereign axis. Where the old order saw a pawn, he revealed a rival. And so, on that August morning, When Beijing's ink dried on a $2.1 billion deal, the world awoke to a new reality. Africa was not waiting. Africa was building. If you believe this is what Africa needed all along, say amen in the comments below. The ripple became a wave, and the wave struck far beyond the red earth of Burkina Faso. In the corridors of Washington, silence turned to unease. Cosmetic giants scrambled to reformulate. Labs in Denver confessed their new blends felt wrong. In Chicago, store owners whispered of shelves gone bare. From Brooklyn to Los Angeles, small businesses closed their doors. The once invisible women of Ouagadougou and Kaya had, without leaving their villages, shaken the world's supply chains. In Paris, policymakers spoke of market disruptions. In London, traders watched the Shea Futures Index spike 11% overnight. In New York, the Wall Street Journal did something it rarely does. It placed Africa on its front page. The headline read, "From Shea to Strategy, Africa's New Power Broker." For decades, Africa had been a footnote in global trade. Now, it was the headline across Africa news outlets. The phrase African sovereignty was no longer theory, it was proof. Analysts at the African Development Bank declared the shift seismic. They have gone, one economist said, from being exploited to being irreplaceable. It was not just butter on the line. It was identity. It was leverage. It was history bending in real time. In the streets of Nairobi, murals appeared, women lifting barrels of Shea toward a rising sun. In Dakar, students sang protest songs reborn as hymns of victory. In Johannesburg, poets recited verses where cracked shea nuts became symbols of scars finally healing. Across the Sahel crossroads, people asked the same question if butter could change the map. What else could cocoa, coffee, cotton, gold? Meanwhile, the West scrambled to regain footing. Estee Lauder suspended entire product lines. Smaller brands taped boxes by hand, cutting corners to survive. Consumers in Miami and Houston complained loudly, "This isn't real Shea." Labels no longer carried origins. Trust evaporated. Loyalty withered. And all the while, warehouses in Ouagadougou stamped barrels, not for America but for Guangzhou. In Addis Ababa, diplomats reviewed a framework proposed by President Ibrahim Traoré. It was not a plea, but a proposal. Clear. Bold. Unapologetic. "We used to ask," one West African envoy whispered. "Now we negotiate." The transformation was visible not only in trade halls, but in the minds of African leaders. For the first time, the continent was not waiting for aid but writing contracts that demanded respect. Even in Asia, the tremor was felt. Japanese beauty houses signed direct agreements with Burkina Faso cooperatives. South Korean startups hailed the texture and purity of the gold of the global south. Indonesian officials invited Burkina Faso's delegation to discuss palm oil refining along the same model. The pivot was no longer about survival, it was about a new balance of power. For the women of Burkina Faso, the change was deeply personal. Paychecks arrived on time. Invoices were respected. Royalties were guaranteed, a global first. What had begun as an assault had turned into protection. What had begun as betrayal had birthed dignity. The West had expected silence. Instead, the continent answered with a roar. And in that roar was something bigger than butter. It was the return of Pan-Africanism, not as a slogan but as a strategy. Not in rallies but in contracts. Not in speeches but in schedules. The question that once mocked Africa now circled back to the West. Could they afford a world where Africa was not their reserve, but their rival? What began as a tariff had become something far greater, a doctrine. Across African universities, students debated the Shea doctrine in packed lecture halls. In Accra, youth cooperatives printed labels that read, "From Africa with Authority." In Lagos, radio hosts asked, if Burkina Faso can rewrite the rules with butter, why not with cocoa? In Bamako, Farmers spoke of cashews in Dar es Salaam, of palm oil in Kinshasa, of cobalt. The tremor was spreading. President Ibrahim Traoré did not present it as charity or rebellion. He called it infrastructure, discipline, readiness. He told his ministers, when we control the first mile and the last word, we control the story. Those words echoed from boardrooms in Nairobi to business schools in Cape Town. No longer did Africa whisper for inclusion, it declared itself indispensable. In the villages of Burkina Faso, the change was measured not in headlines but in daily bread. Women who once cracked nuts barefoot now scanned digital invoices, learning Mandarin phrases as they signed contracts with foreign buyers. For the first time, cooperatives received royalties from every ton exported. Dignity, long denied, was written into law. Cultural life reflected the shift. In Johannesburg, poets compared shea paste to the scars of history healing into strength. In Dar es Salaam, murals showed mothers lifting barrels toward the sky. Musicians released songs with choruses chanting, "Shea is ours." Even school children in Ouagadougou were given homework assignments asking, "What does sovereignty smell like?" One 12-year-old wrote, "It smells like the butter my grandmother makes." Internationally, the pivot unsettled old empires. French envoys arrived in Ouagadougou seeking new deals. But for the first time, they negotiated as equals, not masters. In Seoul, K-beauty brands bypassed European middlemen and signed direct contracts. In Tokyo, cosmetics executives praised the purity of women's gold. In Jakarta, ministers studied the model for their own commodities. The question was no longer whether Burkina Faso could endure, but how far this new axis could reach. Could coffee, cotton, or even gold be redefined not as raw exports but as sovereign leverage? Could Africa finally move from being the world's warehouse to being the world's rival? In every corner of the Sahel crossroads, the answer seemed closer. The doctrine was spreading not as propaganda but as practice. In lecture halls, in markets, in ministries, the phrase African sovereignty returned with teeth. It was no longer theory, but law, and voice, and schedule. For President Ibrahim Traoré, the battle was not yet over. He instructed ministries to audit contracts for loopholes, to ban offshore arbitration, to put workers first. He insisted that sovereignty be measured not in applause but in paychecks, not in speeches but in shipping manifests. His model was discipline, not spectacle, and so the Shea doctrine emerged, a belief that Africa could no longer afford to sell its soul cheap, that its smallest farmers, its most overlooked women, could become the custodians of a continental blueprint. That Pan-Africanism was not just a dream of unity, but a practical roadmap where butter became banner and banner became battle. Burkina Faso Ibrahim Traoré had not simply saved an industry, he had opened a door. The only question left was who else would dare to walk through. From the red earth of Burkina Faso, a tremor has shaken the world. What began as a tariff designed to break a nation ended as a doctrine that may yet rebuild a continent. The United States thought it could brand shea butter unworthy. Instead, President Ibrahim Traoré turned it into a sovereign weapon, not of destruction, but of dignity. This was more than a trade dispute. It was the unveiling of a truth long buried, that African sovereignty is not granted, it is claimed. Traoré, like Sankara before him, stood where others bowed and declared that Africa would no longer beg for inclusion. It would negotiate as equal, demand as rival, and rise as leader. In every clause of the $2.1 billion deal, in every refinery breaking ground, in every cooperative woman signing her name, a new Africa was born. The world now speaks the name Burkina Faso with caution, with respect, with strategy. For once, Africa is not waiting to be written into history. It is holding the pen, And at the center stands President Ibrahim Traoré, carrying the spirit of Sankara, carving a place for his people, not in margins, but in headlines. So we ask, would our ancestors be proud if they saw Africa building not just survival, but sovereignty? Would they smile knowing that the smallest farmers, the forgotten women, have become the architects of a continental future? If this story moved something in your chest, don't scroll past. Like, share, speak, subscribe, because they hid our history long enough. Let's speak our future out loud. Thank you for being here. We'll see you in the next story, the kind they still don't want you to hear. Comment below with your truth. New Africa, Africa rise, Africa can do it. It's time for Africa.